everybody. Welcome back to the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast. This week I'm having a conversation with a couple of accomplished podcasters who interviewed me a couple of years ago. These young guys have had some impressive guests on their show. Make sure you tune in to the DOS and D podcast. So welcome to episode 8. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been travelling in the USA with my partner and watching the goings on in this country. I'm amazed at what is happening in politics, where it's seeming to be that the major parties are merely a window dressing for an establishment that does what it wants in the interests of powerful players. Who would have thought? All the while, wokeism, professional agitators on college campuses, governments trying to silence political opponents, 800,000 refugees crossing the border every month, and all manner of unacceptable goings on, and very few seem concerned. It seems freedom is slowly disappearing. Then in Australia, just this week, the federal government passed their digital ID bill with hardly a gasp from the general public, and few seem concerned. I ask myself, where are all the young men in this? Why are they not standing up for big issues that can affect their future and the future of their families? Or is this just the domain of older men who take time to contemplate life? I'm keen to hear what my guests think about this. So, who is DOS and D? For a start, they are good young guys, and Wayde's dad was a dear friend of mine who had a moral code that was about 3 feet thick. Please introduce yourself, guys. Wayde, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, JT. Firstly, really appreciate the invitation, mate. Obviously the relationship goes a long way back between you and my dad. Just to clear the listeners up, our podcast is called DOS and D. I'm DOS. The nickname is DOS. Danny, nickname is D. We're high school buddies, but our real name is Wayde and Daniel, and all our mates. That's what they call us, DOS and D. But
I wonder quickly if DOS stood for Dickie's off the rails son.
That's quite good. That's very clever. Yeah, I used to be off the rails, not so much anymore. But yeah, mate, it's awesome to be on here. Yeah, and you know, we've been going for about nearly 4 years now as a podcast. Two best mates who kind of, very much of what you're about, John, which is staying true to yourself and following what you feel is true to your calling. And 4 years ago, we were both in jobs. We would have been 25, maybe 24, 25. It was COVID had just kind of come out, or just in the middle of COVID, and we wanted to, like, we were those two blokes who were just reading personal development books every day and trying to do a side hustle. We just wanted to do something outside of work, like a project that might be able to turn into something. And yeah, we thought, well, let's talk to people. So it started off with just us two, just in my little 2-bed apartment in Safety Beach, funnily enough, down in Dramana. And it was just us two talking about stuff young men don't really talk about when they come out of high school. So it was, we were trying to, our audience we were trying to target was 18-year-old kids or men who were coming out of high school and talking about what we wish we knew better about relationships, what we wish we knew better about money, what we wish we knew better about sex, what we wish we knew better about health, mental health, all of that stuff, and just sharing kind of our struggles with those and what we wish we knew, and then what we would have rather changed when we were coming out of school. But yeah, then it turned into an interview style show, and it's just kind of grown legs. But we've worked hard, and but we've had fun along the journey, and it's only just kind of beginning, which is exciting.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not, I suppose, too much more to add. I mean, although our show structure has changed quite a lot 4 years later, John, I think we connected, I think it was late 2021, we had you on our podcast, and you would have been one of the first people we interviewed in person because we're coming out of the lockdown stages. But yeah, now we're predominantly an entertainment show. So what that means is we can basically interview anybody. So we've been privileged enough to have great athletes, musicians, entertainers, business owners, influencers, you name it. We've had that type of industry. And our mission, though, probably
health and wellness speakers.
That's it.
Got two.
But our mission probably hasn't actually changed too much. It's probably the way we get the message across it has. And we've always been big at the start, because when we did start our podcast, the whole woke culture that you talk about was probably at its highest level. maybe, I don't know. You might disagree with that, but it was at an incredibly high level. And we probably disagreed with quite a lot of what was being pushed. So we wanted to create a platform that allowed people to share their views and their opinions in a judge-free zone. So we didn't want to create a left-wing show or a right-wing show or something that was very tunnel vision. We wanted to allow different voices, different opinions, whether we agreed or we disagreed. I think we've managed to achieve that over 4 years. We've had a lot of different opinions, a lot of controversial people, things that get us in trouble just by being guilty by association sometimes. But we just stand by the fact that, hey, if you disagree, that's fine. You're welcome to come on and argue that point. So our whole thing is we want to inspire and educate the young people to really chase their calling in life and go after what they believe. And our whole mindset initially was, let's see if we can do it for ourselves first and create a bit of a blueprint. We're not there yet, but we're getting very, very close. We're fortunate enough to have turned our hobby into something that rewards us financially, is creating a career for us, more and more opportunities each week. We've got a radio opportunity coming up too. So it's a slow burn, and that's the message we kind of want to get across over time.
Well, guys, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is well done. I mean, persistence is an incredible quality, and it's probably the most important quality, and you've hung in there and you've allowed yourself to be flexible. And I'm wondering, have you moved right away from the original intention of supporting young people coming out of school, or is there still an element of that in what you're doing? Is that sort of intention still running there?
I think what's happened is our audience has actually shifted without us really knowing and trying to shift it. So what our purpose was helping young men, but a large portion of that listenership was women. So it was almost like, oh, well, we know we're not just talking to blokes anyway. We're talking about blokey stuff, but the girls are listening because obviously, that's really, really great as well, knowing that, all right, if their partners or mothers listening, they can hear what young guys are struggling with and understand. It's definitely, as well, we're not young blokes anymore. We're both coming on 30. You'll hate me saying that.
I
do. But I think we've probably shifted more to an overarching audience of the umbrella. Young men fall under that umbrella for sure because of a lot of the guests we have on, especially a lot of sport. I think a lot of young men still listen, but you could probably say our questioning isn't probably along the lines that it was what it once was.
Yeah.
Whereas back then we probably were really asking questions that were detailed around what would you do if you were younger? What advice would you give to a 23-year-old guy who's at university? We're not really asking those questions anymore, but our audience is definitely still a large portion of younger men for sure.
Yeah,
and I think it's how you communicate the message too. So there's one way where we could scream down the microphones and tell people how to live their lives, read this book, listen to this podcast, do this, do that, have a cold shower at 4 a.m, all that sort of stuff. But we found at the time, one of the key words for us was vulnerability. It still is, but at the time, vulnerability was about sharing. You see a lot of clips of people breaking down and talking about the hardest parts of their life, which we've done as well. But we also realize there's a space of vulnerability about actually sharing funny experiences that everybody relates to. So if we're talking to young men, we talked about, it's quite rogue, and I don't know if you want us to go into it, but we've talked about experiences of our first time with a girl, or things that are funny, that like
first time with alcohol,
time, and when things go wrong, and and most people go, oh my god, I'll never share that in a million years, but they said it happened to me too, and it's funny, and then they relate. And by sharing those kind of stories, and our guests sharing those kind of stories too, people feel a little bit more comfortable with that whole, I suppose, scenario that's happened in their life. And then when we do talk about those deeper topics, people are more likely to listen rather than us saying, oh, I read this from this book. This book tells me to do this. This is what's happened to us. This is how we overcame it. This is what we went through. And I guess do the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, thanks for that. And I agree, and I acknowledge you for that, because, I've heard it more than once, that the thing that human beings fear more than death is humiliation. But it's amazing how many times we create situations where we get humiliated, And I think that probably a significant factor in male suicides is a fear of humiliation. And, young guys, older guys sitting on a secret, something that they just can't tell anybody because they're so afraid of the humiliation that it's easier to just take the back door and exit stage right, And So being open and being able to just talk about those things and laugh at yourself and relax the environment so other people can sort of admit what the stupid things they've done. I mean, that's huge. It's really huge because, there's too much seriousness in the world, and I remember, you remember when you came to the Avatar course, Wayde, Avra Honey Smith, who was leading the course, she once said to us, she said that seriousness is a glue that locks up your mind. And when people are sitting on a secret, they're sitting on a problem and they become very serious about it, they shut themselves down. And so what you're doing creates a space where they can open up and just say, hey, I did this, I fucked up,
Yeah, 100%. And one key bit though, which can be difficult at times, is like it's like you, JT, when you do these podcasts, you only get a smaller window to chat before, and then you got to interview and chat and ask these questions. So unless you know them personally before, you might not have the serious rapport to kind of just have that larrikin, throw around, jokey joke kind of demeanor.
Yeah.
So when you have someone rock up and you might only have 5 minutes, you kind of have to warm them up for the first 15 minutes of the interview, and then you can do it,
Yeah, exactly. No, it's very interesting. It's and I think that, this is all again about, like, you guys, one of the best definitions I was ever given of vulnerability was to be in a situation where you have absolutely no idea what to do next, but being okay with that. And see, what I realize is that's where your power is, because in that moment, that's when your intuition kicks in and tells you what to do next, what the next step is. It's not going to come from your mind. And then having the courage to follow that. And, part of my pathway to developing a stronger moral code is recognizing those times when I felt those things I needed to do, but I backed away from it, because I was worried about someone else's judgment or feedback or whatever, And I'm wondering, in those moments in the podcast when you feel something and it's like, and there's a question there that you want to ask, but maybe you pull back because you're not quite sure. How are you going with that sort of stuff? Do you feel like you're getting better with that stuff?
That's a great question, John. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. We're getting better at that. We'd like to say, again, I think at the start we were hesitant when we first started, we hesitated to go across the tram line, so to speak. We had tunnel vision. We know what people want to hear and what people don't want to hear. And we're afraid of being probably controversial or stepping out. The more we stepped into that, the bigger our listenership has grown and the bigger the show has gotten from it. Because although you have a large percentage of your audience disagree or not like you, I mean, we get negative comments every day. If you have a look at our TikTok comments, it'll show that. But for every person that hate might not be the right word, but dislikes you, 5 people start to follow and listen and share it. So that's kind of the whole thing. But to answer your question, there's been a few times where we've asked questions to people, and in the end, it hasn't even gone to air because the answer was a straight bat defense. So, and we understand it too. I mean, some of my favorite podcasts we've done is with older generation people, and the reason being is because they've done what they've had to do in the world. They've got their reputation. There's nothing to lose anymore. They can share the truth and how they really feel. Whereas when we interview, say, athletes in the AFL or in the NBL or cricket or soccer or wherever, and they're in the thick of their professional career, of course they can't answer truthfully. But it is interesting that as soon as you turn the microphones off, sometimes the truth comes out. They kind of relax, they sit back, and for an hour, they just tell you how they really feel. But they say, unfortunately, I can't say this because I'm employed by this, entity or this club, and the ramifications will be huge. But again, we're very open. Most people say I'm an open book. We always ask them before we start recording what's off limits. If there's something off limits, we won't go there. But 9 times out of 10, and we got told this the other day by Mike Sheen, who's a great Australian journalist, that if people agree to come on your show, they've generally got that mindset. And if they don't come on, it's because there's probably skeletons in the closet that they're afraid of you revealing. How do you think we've gone with it?
No, I think that's spot on. I don't think I need to go any further with that because I think that was so well answered.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? It's because I think, we sort of go into that space where we feel something and then we act on it or we don't act on it. When we don't act on it, well, then that's an opportunity for reflection and learning, as opposed to self-criticism and degrading ourselves and that sort of thing, because at the end of the day, I suppose when it comes to the end of your life, you want to be able to look back and go, you know what? I was a pretty good person, and not have regrets about things. And I don't know whether I ever told you, Wade, but there's a story I have about your dad, and I hope you don't mind me bringing it up, but it's a beautiful story. It was August the 14th, 2016, and you probably remember that day. I was up
I
in
do.
New Zealand, and it was the morning after your dad had his diagnosis. And he rang me up because I'd rung him the day before, and he said, "I'll call you tomorrow." And he rang me, and I said, "How you going, Dickie?" And he said, "Oh, not too good, Johnny." And I said, "What's going on?" And he told me about how Scotty McGuinness had told me to go and see the GP because he had this niggling back problem. And I had your dad on a running program at the time.
I remember.
Yeah, and he was laughing.
I even did a couple of sessions with him. Yeah.
Wow. And and then he told me about having a tumor on his liver the size of a footy and having cancer in his spine and all that sort of stuff. And I said, "Wow, Dickie, so what's the prognosis, mate?" And he went quiet for a second. He said, "Well, Johnny, I'm fucked. I'm going to die." I said, "Jesus." And I said, "Well, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that, Dickie?" And he said, "No, I'm good with it, Johnny. I'm good with it." And only somebody with a clear conscience can say that. And that was the quality of your dad. He was only with us for a bit over 50 years, but he was such a good man, and he did the right thing by people all the time. And he had very strong belief in his faith, but didn't preach it to anybody. And he showed up in the world, and he boosted so many people's careers. And I often think of your dad in situations, and I think, what would Dickie do here? And it's we need more men like him in the world.
Yeah, 100%. It's sorry, mate.
No, you're good.
Yeah, when you hear that, it's I love hearing that, and I love talking about my dad, especially with people like yourself, John, who knew him well, especially in the industry that he was in. I think a lot of people probably saw what he did for a living, and it was such an incredible feat what he did, what he achieved. And as a kid, I had no idea what he did until I grew older, and I realized, wow, it had nothing to do with the events. It had nothing to do with the guest speakers. It was purely about people and just being a good person.
He brought people together. He was a master connector of people. And he just, he did it with such humility and such grace and such kindness. They're just grand qualities. They're not fly-by-night qualities. They're grand qualities that, sometimes we don't see enough of them in the world.
No way. And I still have moments where a lot of times where I'll lean back on and I'll think, oh, what would Dad think in this situation? Or what would I do if he was here? Or what would I ask him? Or what would he say to me? And there's so many little things that I didn't realize were things I would remember, but I have because of the way he taught me them. Like there's a couple of things. One in particular, he was always so big on to us as kids, especially to me. I'll share this. So I went through a real, what did you say DOS stands for?
Dickie's off the rails son.
Okay. So this is a great example of that. So I was 18 and I was going through like not a rebellious stage, but I was, at 10, 18, I was going to the local nightclub and, I ended up getting maybe it wasn't, maybe it was before I got into a relationship, but I was, being a rat bag, getting with girls and going and having beers and just probably not taking my education too seriously. And I went on schoolies up on the Gold Coast. And I know that he didn't really want me to go, or my mum, but they knew that. But that was the great thing about my dad too, is as much as he didn't want me to go, he didn't stop me from going, and he wasn't a helicopter parent at all. He was very much of like, go and do it, and whatever happens, you'll learn. So I went, had a great time, came back, and I think my dad could sense there was almost this like new persona Wade, like an arrogant Wade, right? I came back and I was this big honcho, and I'm about to go, go to uni, and I finished school, and I'm getting with all the girls, and like, oh, how good am I, And then he basically, we were in the lounge room, and he goes, "What happened? What happened up there?" As a bit of a joke. I said,
Yeah.
"What do you mean?" And he goes, "Mate, you seem like a different bloke." And then he kind of just I abbreviated a little bit more, and he kind of just said, "Mate, just leave your ego at the door. Every time you walk into this house, I want you to take that jacket off and put it on the door, because your sisters don't need this, and your mum doesn't need this, And it just really put me in check, and I was like, I didn't realize I'd turned into a dick, like, and I don't think I was a dick, but I know who I am now, and that, like, I'm a real humble, genuine, person. To think I was like that is, I mean, I was only a kid, but just that was like one little story that I just will never forget. That he just, and it wasn't in a disciplinary way. It was just like, come on, mate, don't be stupid, like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That's Dicky. That's Dicky.
yeah,
They disarm you and set you on the right track without offending you.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very good. And what about you, Danny? What's your dad like? Have you had a good relationship with your dad?
Yeah, I have a very good relationship with my dad. It's been interesting. So I think, John, when I first met you 3 years ago, we grabbed coffee, and I think you might have even heard my dad speak many years ago. So my dad was a motivational speaker, traveled
Of
the world.
course.
Yeah, so
I'll
Gary
never
is
forget your dad, Gary Shully, yeah?
that's it. Yeah. So many people that have been in the business world in Melbourne over the last 20, 30 years have probably heard him speak at some stage. So his story is very interesting. And his story is his story. It's not mine. But he had a really tough upbringing. He was living in London, in a very rough part of London. And at a very young age, his mum, my grandma, came and lived in Australia. And I was telling Doss the other day, we were on a plane flying from Gold Coast to Melbourne. I said, I can't, like, my dad did the London to Melbourne route back in the 70s. He said it was 72 hours as a 7-year-old on his own, to go and see his parents. And cutting a long story short, at the age of 19, my dad found my biological granddad, who I never met, had found him. He killed himself. So found him to suicide literally at the scene. So there's obviously a lot of trauma in that. And the reason I share that is for me, has been a very loving dad, because he said from that moment on, if he ever has the privilege of having children, that he'll love them and look after them based on what happened to him. So dad, very similar to Dickie, and that's probably why Doss and I get on so well. He's been in the event space, the speaking space, the business space for my whole life. It's probably why we're both so passionate about creating something of our own, and being able to live a life where maybe one day we'll be able to give our kids what our dads gave us, which was, a dad that actually was at home rather than an office, had flexibility, could put time into us. So, yeah, and look, my dad won't mind me saying this, as he's gotten older, he's been through a lot, and he's mellowed a lot. He's very fortunate to be here, battled sickness, he's battled amputation, very, very severe surgeries, very, very, like, and I'm next of kin, funny enough. So you get these messages that say there's a 50% chance his surgery will work, 50% chance that's it. And you kind of sit there all day waiting and following the text from the hospital saying, he's going in and he's coming out and he's in recovery. But he's mellowed a lot. Like Dickie, he's got a strong faith as well, which I've witnessed him carry him through those really dark times.
Yeah.
And he's very open about mistakes he's made in the past too. Probably around ego as well, funny enough, especially when you get to a level of, for him, when he was speaking, there wasn't many speakers in Australia, and probably at that level. So for him, it was like, he could fill out arenas, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people in a day, and sell thousands of dollars worth of books and tapes and CDs or whatever they're selling. So I've learned a lot, and we've gone through, as I've got two sisters, similar again, exactly like Doss here. And we've been through our, ups and downs as a family. My parents ended up getting divorced, which was the best thing. But probably the thing I admire most about my dad is he's never disciplined me. And I was a very well behaved, I think, teenager. And my ratbag stage, I was probably 22, 23.
Mm-hmm.
But I dropped out of school at the end of year 11, and much to the very huge disappointment of my mum and my grandparents and probably my wider family. But dad just said, look, school's not for him. It's not doing well at school. He doesn't enjoy school. Come into the workforce, and for 4 years I worked with him and I learned a lot. So again, just the ability to make my own decisions, and that fact he always backed me in. I was never told do this, do that. And I think what I've learned when I become a parent one day is that setting boundaries, but not being, vigilant in terms of, ruling with an iron fist. I knew my boundaries, and I always respected my parents because they respected me. They treated me like an adult. They let me make mistakes. And thankfully, I don't believe I ever put them in a position as a young kid or as a teenager that they would really worry, because they respected me and I respected them. And that's one thing I learned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's I really know what you're talking about there. And it's a similar relationship with my son, and it's and oftentimes, I was taking big risks to give him that space. But because I trusted him, he never breached my trust. And it's a really lovely formula.
What's that story, John, about you and your son about he had some mates over for a sleepover?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was
that's a good one. That's a good one on trust.
Yeah, what was? Well, it was a Friday night and we were living down the peninsula, and he was like 14, I think. And we had he had a bunch of his mates over. There's about 5 of them. It was a Friday night. I got them pizzas and some soft drink, and they were going to watch some movies. And about 9:30, I came into them. I said, "Righto, guys, I'm going to bed," because I had a 100K bike ride to do the next morning through the hills on the peninsula, And I said, just be smart tonight and don't make too much noise. I'm going to bed. And they said, yep, no worries. And at about 12:30, he knocked on my door and came into my room and he said, Dad. And I said, yeah, mate, what is it? And he said, we want to go down to the beach. Now, we live 3 kilometres from the beach, and it was a summer's night. It was warm. And I said, really? Why? And he goes, oh, because we're just not tired and we just want to go for a walk down the beach. And that was a crossroad for me, So, God, what am I going to do here? And I said, well, what's your plan? And he said, well, it'll take about a half-hour walk down there. We'll walk along the beach for 15 minutes and then back, and we'll be home by 2 a.m. And I said, okay, and what about Jesse? What are you going to do with him? Because he's noisy and people are asleep. And he said, Dad, I promise we'll keep Jesse under control. So I took a big swallow and I said, okay, mate, be back by 2. And off they went. And I lay there and I sort of dozed, and I wasn't really worried or anything. My only concern was that other people might get a bit agitated, teenage boys being out that late at night. But I let him go. And at 3 minutes to 2, there was a knock on my door. He said, Dad, we're back. We're going to bed. And he never, ever asked me for anything like that ever again. It was just interesting, And I just realized later on, wow, when you give your kids trust and you give them an opportunity to honor it, they don't need to test you anymore. It was pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So, guys, where to from here? Who would you like to interview? Like, if you could have anybody in the world, who would you like to have on your podcast, and why would you like to have them?
Oh, it's such a good question. We have massive aspirations and dreams, and I've learned a lot from you, JT, and obviously going over and doing that course too with you, and nothing's I remember a clear thing of coming out of that is like, why not? Why can't you not do that? And why can't you interview those people? And we've come so far already. We've interviewed people that we dreamt of interviewing already. But in terms of international, like we would love to go. We went to England for the podcast how many years ago?
Yeah, 2.5.
2.5 years.
Started 22, yeah.
But we went. It was more like we just got out of a lockdown, and we were kind of like, no one's going overseas. Everyone's too scared because we might go back in. Let's just go. Let's take the podcast mics and go overseas. And we had a couple of interviews lined up over there. So we did those. But that was a cool experience. But we loved Ricky Gervais is on our top of our list.
Yeah, yeah.
We're both huge Office. Like, we've loved The Office since we were kids, and love his stand up as well. And then Robbie Williams as well, the UK musician or entertainer. And then, gosh, who else? It's a big one here in Australia is we really want to interview Eddie Maguire. Might sound really basic, but just someone who, we got Sam Newman on last year and we loved interviewing Sam. And we've both read Eddie's book, and people used to say about my dad, actually, people used to say he's the Eddie Maguire of the Mornington Peninsula, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't quite understand what that meant. And I don't think Dad probably used to hate it when people used to say that. Go, shut up. But again, just a people whisperer, just probably has so many different tricks and things he could share and amazing stories. But I'm sure Danny's got a few as well.
Oh, well, they're the three that came to my mind too, John. I mean, we've got a big list, and we work our way through it and try and find those points of connections, and we're the same. We're about building relationships, so we can get these opportunities one day. So I think one other major change for us, especially in the last 12 months, is yes, it's definitely about the guest when they come on the show, but at the same time, we want people to listen to the show regardless of who's on, and even if it's just the two of us. And it's funny, when we started monetizing our show, the only way we could monetize is by saying, hey, we've got this person coming on the show. Do you want to sponsor that episode because this person's going to be on? They'll be, your brand aligns with them, sort of thing. And we could sell bits and pieces, but we'd have to wait for those really big name guests to come on, and we could get a bit of cash here and there, not a lot. And then we decided, no, when we started seeing a trend that when you look at the statistics of downloads each week, there wasn't a huge disparity. So if it was a big name guest or a lesser known guest, or even just us, it's roughly around the same. There might be a slight spike for someone really big, but then we decided, okay, well, that's what our whole goal was. We wanted people to listen because they enjoy us and how we interact with certain people. And it takes time. When you start off, people listen to your show because they want to support you, and then when that listenership starts to drop off, your real audience comes through. The people that actually listen to you because they respect you, or they enjoy you, or they're entertained by you. And so the reason I say that in a kind of a long-winded way is that our guest profile changes all the time, and we've interviewed people that we never thought we would have, in terms of industries. We've had a medium come on the show, which for us was
psychic
medium. So for us, that was very out of our realm of probably understanding. We've had porn stars come on the show. We've had people that investigate ghosts. They're ghost hunters. We've had these
survival experts.
Yeah. So we're trying to really broaden that range, so it's not just a sports show or a music show or a business show. And that's why when people pop up with interesting stories, we'd love to have them on and hear it. So yes, but those three that Dos mentioned, they're the big three at the moment.
I'm sure there's a few AFL footballers out there that see ghosts, by the way.
Probably days in Richmond. They might see you in their dreams, John.
You never know, right? You never know. But that's a really interesting thing too, because the whole area around sport and winning and that sort of thing, and the lengths that people go to win and to even cheat, and we know about what football clubs have done with salary caps, and what's happened in cricket over time, and we know about Lance Armstrong, and I was really disappointed in that Lance Armstrong thing, not because of what he did, but it was such an opportunity for cycling to clean its act up, because they could have put their hands up and said, hey, we're all doing it. Don't take his titles away from him. Let's all clean up now, but they didn't do it. And it's the real integrity thing, and, I know that there's premiership football teams going right back to the early 60s in Melbourne that used anabolic steroids.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, I know a team from the era between 1975 and 1985 that used a lot of steroids, and two of the players from one of those premiership teams are both dead from liver cancer,
Oh.
And, there's that whole thing about what I always wonder what happens to people inside football clubs that they decide that stuff's okay, instead of just really optimizing everything. And then, you look at, one of the things that's in my craw about footy these days is Joe Watson. because when that all happened, like Essendon wasn't the only club doing that. You know, there's a lot of other clubs using those peptides, and it was a really grey area about whether they were illegal or not. But he was honest when he was asked about it on the couch on a Monday night, and he just said, "Yeah, I took it," and he got slaughtered the next few days in the media. And I contacted Jared Healy, who interviewed him, and I said, "Jared, are you going to show up for him now? Because he told you the truth." And you guys were always complaining that people won't tell you the truth. He told you the truth that you're going to defend him, but Jared didn't show up. And I was really disappointed in that. And I'm disappointed in the fact that Job hasn't got his Brownlow medal, whereas there's other players who've got Brownlow medals who we know were using a lot of drugs when they were playing football. And I wonder where the integrity of the whole game is at because of that. Somebody's not making a decision because they're frightened of something, you know?
Yes.
And it's, you know, I wonder about that, you know, we can get so much better by just stepping into being just a little bit more honest about those things. Because Joe Watson, he was the statesman of the game.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, he was my favorite player, and it's really interesting you say that, and I agree, and it's I really do believe that too, and stepping into the truth, and like I said to you, we use Sam Newman as an example. When we had Sam Newman on the show, there was a lot of backlash, and it was really unlucky timing that he happened to come out that week and say some pretty outrageous comments the week before we were about to release the show. Now, he didn't say them on our show, but people straight away said, well, how can you endorse somebody, blah, blah, blah. But I think it was interesting to Sam just says it how it is. Now, whether you agree or you disagree, that's up to you to make your own interpretation. And that's something we really believe in. And one thing we found really disappointing in our industry, especially when we were trying to get off the ground, was that there was a lot of podcasts doing similar things to us. And they would have a guest on, and then for whatever reason, that guest makes a mistake, call them an athlete. They make a mistake, they get slaughtered in the media, and that podcast or that brand disassociates straight away and says, oh, hang on, we don't condone this, blah, blah, blah. Rather than, okay, you don't wrap your hands around their action that they took, but to disown that person and come out and almost join in the slaughtering. I remember we looked at each other for one particular incident, and we were outraged because for us, on a selfish level, it kills, okay, well, people are going to be less willing to come on and do your show because, especially back then when we're trying to build an audience, because they've got this fear that, you know,
you're grabbing a headline.
You're grabbing a headline, you're not genuine. And we found that really, really disappointing. So again, it's not condoning actions, but people make mistakes. And every guest we've had on the show, we've made millions of mistakes. We share some of the mistakes. Some of them we're not proud of. We joke, but we're not proud of them. And that's why when we had Sam and people said, how could you have Sam? You should have this person, that person. Yes, in the light of the day, they seem like great people, but they say all the right things and they're not sharing the truth. They're just sharing what we want to hear, what we're supposed to hear. And no one listens when that's the case.
No.
And that's why we really like your concept, John. Like, your concept is so great because it's the truth and it's allowing a platform to speak and let people share their opinions or their beliefs in a judge-free zone and not afraid to have freedom of speech.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I was having breakfast this morning with my partner's ex-husband, and he comes from a Lakota Sioux Indian tradition. And I was talking to him about how I love that culture. I read up a lot about the Lakota Sioux back in the 90s. And there's one thing I took from it. They had this beautiful saying that said, you are who you are, you're not what you've done. You know, and we give people the space to make mistakes. I mean, how do people learn if they don't make mistakes? But on that note as well, I first met Sam Newman in 1980, and I've never called him Sam. I've always called him John. And he used to come into the Golden Bowl to train in Camberwell, which you guys probably never heard of, but it was Melbourne's first big indoor sports centre, and I was working in the men's gym. We had men's gym and women's gym. And Sam used to come in, and I used to look at him, and my mates used to work down. We go, that is the best physique we've ever seen. Sam was an extraordinary athlete, but the other thing about Sam Newman that most people don't know, he's profoundly intelligent. He's Mensa, you know, and I just reckon he's one of the most decent human beings I know. and I don't know him that well, but we've sat and had some conversations, and you're right. He says what he feels in the moment. If people don't like it, he doesn't give a shit.
No.
That's fine. And half the time he plays on that and he says things to stir people up.
Yeah,
Because he
exactly.
reckons people need to feel uncomfortable sometimes, and he's probably right. So it's
what I find really interesting in that example is Sam's probably nearly been one of our highest download and watched episodes we've had in the 4 years, right? But it's probably had the most negative comments around it on social media and whatever you want to, whatever else. But I'd love to know how many of those negative comments or people are actually listening and watching as well, because it's not just all those watches and listens that are now nearly the most downloaded show in our history. I'm almost certain a lot of the people that write negative stuff actually go and listen because they want to grab something from it to pull him down as well.
Yeah.
Or to give to us. And in regarding to the quote that you just said, you actually mentioned that quote on our podcast last time too.
Right. Yeah. Well, it had an impact on me. It really did.
Yeah.
It cuts us all a bit of slack.
100%.
There's one other question I really wanted to ask you, getting back to healthy masculinity, what do you reckon it is, the young women of your generation, what do you reckon that they feel about the young men of your generation? Because I've been hearing a lot that a lot of younger women are sort of starting to date older men because they're frustrated with younger guys. I mean, how do you reckon that's all going? Is there something that younger guys need to do to step up? Because I'm wondering, I gave a talk at Marcelin to the Year 12 boys a few weeks back on mental health. And the thing I love about Marcelin is they never try to doctor anything I say. They just open the room up and they say, John, whatever you want to talk about. And I talked about healthy masculinity and I said to them, I'm going to give you a definition of toxic masculinity. It's a range that starts at idiot and finishes at dickhead, and part of your role in developing your healthy masculinity is when your mates are being an idiot or a dickhead, it's your job to pull them out of that and set them straight. That's part of your personal morality, And I just wonder what you feel is the landscape, I suppose, for young guys in their 20s right now.
Yeah, you go for it.
Well, it's obviously very complex. I think, firstly, it's interesting with that toxic masculinity quote, wording, whatever you want to call it, because those goalposts seem to have shifted humongously. I agree with you 100%. It makes sense. Starts an idiot, finishes a dickhead. But at somewhere along the line, toxic masculinity became, in my opinion, things that I don't understand to be toxic at all. And when you talk about, obviously, we can't talk on behalf of women, but we can probably talk about our personal experiences. So I've seen both. I mean, my current girlfriend's very good. She'll say to me, if I'm not being masculine, she's less attracted to me. She said that to me. Mm-hmm. So she understands that, and she believes in masculinity and femininity, and she believes that, there's a role to play between, I suppose, a heterosexual couple in those regards. But then back when I was single, I remember a girl on a date once directly to my face, I want to be with a woke guy. And I said, well, what does woke mean? And she had no idea. She kind of crumbled to water. And then I've also been out with girls where I've literally held the door open for them and they've been offended. That has happened to me. But I think the major part in it all for men and women, and probably gender, and now gender politics is such a huge thing in the world, is that it's confusion. And you talked about in your intro about things that are happening on college campuses in the US. It's outrageous to hear, what's going on. And we've witnessed it to a degree when we were at uni here in Australia, but probably at a much lower level. But it seems to be trendy to be almost unsure or exploring and not tapping into it. And I think I think we're sort of slowly coming out of it. But, personally, it's just me. I'm attracted to women who are women. Who are attracted to men who are men and tap into their masculinity. I would hope that I'm a good partner to my girlfriend, and that, I would hope that's the case. I believe she would say that. But we certainly tap into those aspects. What do you think?
Yeah, like you said, I can't speak on behalf of women, but what I will say is, even just as an example, I went to the footy last week, and it was the Bulldogs v Richmond, and I was with my cousin and a mate. And this big group of like probably 21, 22-year-olds. They got in at, say, halfway through the third quarter. They might, because we're in a reserve seat on level 1, they must have come down from the top level, and they were all, half drunk, and they all sat down in front of us, and they were just lipping off at people in front of them. And then it started being this bickering back and forth, and I didn't say anything. But my mate Mickey, there was guys behind us yelling at the guys in front of us, and it was just back and forth, and it went forever. And Mickey just turned around to these girls and just said, "Oh, they were guys," and they were just saying, "Just cut it out, mate. Just cut it out." And as soon as he said, "Just cut it out," they all stopped. Right, everyone stopped, and it wasn't aggressive. It was nothing bad. But why I bring that up is us as men, we need to call stuff out when we see it, And even last night at our footy club, we got brought up the Knox Footy Club situation. I don't know if you read or heard about that, John, but so it happened last weekend. The girls' team played before the men's team.
I did, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were rating them as they
went
in the
terrible.
ground. Yeah.
But every player was doing it apparently. Now, I don't know if that was true or not, but in that situation, there has to be that. It's not going to change until someone else is going to mention it or bring it up or have a go, because you listen to your mates.
Yeah.
It's a good question, and it's a hard one because I don't know with my girlfriend. I don't know necessarily what she thinks, but I was brought up as a man in a healthy masculine, relationship with my dad, and I always, respecting your mother, respecting your sisters, respecting your grandparents, your grandmother. That's just become normal to me. And I think as I've grown older, I've realized, fuck, this isn't normal. Like, what I got was not normal. And I'm so lucky that I got that, because I just got taught that just naturally, just through action of my dad. So I get frustrated when I see or hear, when I hear my sister goes on a date with a guy, and I hear, oh, he said this and he's done that. And I go, how does a bloke do that? Because I just don't understand that. But they don't know. They're not educated like I was educated. So I feel like it's a lack of development with these young men, whether it's in school, there needs to be something in schools, like you're saying, or footy clubs or communities that have these men around or these young guys around, some education around it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got a long way to go, but we can keep at it. I'm sort of been trying to work out how we can put more education into community sports clubs and help the men in the clubs to step up more and be stronger role models to the young guys in the clubs and pull them into line, and help them sort of see that there's a better way to live your life. And you're going to get more in your life if you be kinder and you be more respectful and you be more humble. And it doesn't mean your ego can't get out of control from time to time. But the reality is, can you pull it back in again, like your dad gently pulled yours in, without offending you? And I think that, oftentimes, there's people who are going through this woke phase, like the women who get offended when you open the door for them. Well, that's just their ego that's out of control. That's all that is. You've upset their ego. And it's like, then what do you do with that? Do you then get upset by it and you get put back? Or do you just look at that and go, wow, that's amazing, and not let it knock you off the rails, and that's an area we can really step into. And it's and I guess I'm really lucky because of all the work I did delivering avatar courses and all the training and all the incredible situations I have with working with people. I've got a really healthy buffer now that's between what happens and how I respond. And so there's very little react in my space anymore. But that was a hard road to get to that point. But I'm sure that we can help a lot of people when we don't buy into their drama.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think back a few years, it was just, there's just so, like I said, confusion, but people are afraid as well. And the social media tells you one thing and you shouldn't act like this. And I believe I hated the thought that men were being demasculated. Is that the word? I don't know if that's even a word, but taken away from some of the things that are the great, elements of being a man, whether it's biological or not. But some of those really great aspects were turned into negatives, and I found that that was really challenging, because then you start second guessing your actions and who you are and how you talk to people and how you communicate with people when there might not have been an issue in the first place. I mean, we all have learnt, I think, and gotten better, but at the same time, it's it's frightening to see. I personally, John, these whole gender politics and identity politics, I understand for a lot of people and a minority, it's very important, and I believe in wrapping our arms around them too. But in terms of this whole movement and this push, it probably leads to greater things. It's quite frightening sometimes.
It is. And I think, at the end of the day, we've just got to remember who we are and stick with that. And I remember, and we're sort of getting to the end now, but I remember many years ago, there's a guy I knew of. He was a really cool customer, and he was a really tough guy, very strong and very grounded and very masculine. And he was walking along the road one night, late on a Friday night, with his girlfriend, and a car pulled over and 3 blokes jumped out and they said, "You're dead, mate." They wanted to beat him up. And he stood there and looked at them and leaned over and pulled a paling off a fence and threw it to one of the blokes. And the bloke said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm just giving you that because you're going to need it."
Wow.
And they got back in the car and drove off.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah. But that's how much confidence he had in himself to stand his ground and not let other people pull him off it. So, guys, it's been so good to have you on. I feel like we could go for hours because it's a rich conversation, but alas, we can't, but maybe we can do it again. I really like that. And
we'll have to get you back on our show, John.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, hey? And we can sort of keep having these conversations and keep exploring it. So what I do now is I just finish off the podcast with a couple of things. One is, what's happening in sport at the moment that relates to this. And an absolute beauty was, I don't know whether you've seen it yet, but Tucker Carlson released his first podcast this week, and he sat down for 2 hours with Aaron Rodgers.
Wow.
And my God, what a decent, strong, courageous, well-balanced human being he is. And he walks right through the whole thing where he decided he didn't want to be vaccinated, and he stood his ground, and the NFL, they all fell apart. Some of his sponsors abandoned him, but he just had to stay with what he felt was right. And he was standing up for a lot of people. And but so many things he talked about. He was even invited by Bobby Kennedy to be his running mate. But he's not even playing football yet. And he's about 40 years of age. So that's a great podcast for everybody that really wants to listen into a really deeply decent human being. And
Tucker's very good too.
Sorry?
I said Tucker's a very good interviewer as well.
He's great. Yeah, really is. Yeah. And a lot of people won't listen to him because they think he's still the same guy he was on Fox News. But anyway, that's all right. And I thought for the week, I always like to put, integrity is important in building relationships. And it is the foundation upon which many other qualities for success are built, such as respect, dignity, and trust. So guys, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for tuning into this podcast. And just remember, as I say at the end of every podcast, be the man you needed when you were a kid and you're in trouble. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, John. Loved it.